So for the next session, that is Professor Ranjit Roychowdhury Oration lecture. So now may I invite Professor Urmila Thatte Madam. She is online. So Madam, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good morning, Madam. Welcome, Madam. And also may I invite Professor Santanu Tripathi sir to chair the session.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome, Dr. Urmila. Thank you very much.
Santanu, may I introduce Shoibal, please?
Yes, I am going to that. So, it's a proud privilege we are going to have this Professor Ranjit Roychowdhury Oration, and the oration will be delivered by none other than Dr. Shoibal Mukherjee. I am fortunate we also have Professor Urmila Thatte with us online, and she will be introducing Dr. Shoibal Mukherjee. Before that, let me have a few words about Professor Ranjit Roychowdhury, in whose memory our association has resolved to have this oration every year, and this year Dr. Shoibal Mukherjee is going to deliver the oration. I'll just read out. It's almost an impossible task to introduce Dr. Ranjit Roychowdhury in a few words. He is a legend by himself. But then it's customary to say a couple of words, so let me read out a brief paragraph about Professor Ranjit Roychowdhury. Professor Ranjit Roychowdhury, who established the discipline of clinical pharmacology in India, was among a rare breed, a leader, a charismatic mentor, and a firm believer in affordable health care for all Indians. He worked tirelessly towards passing legislation of free essential medicines to those who need them most. His philosophy and commitment to public service and health equity will continue to shape policy in the decades to come. His students and colleagues will carry on his legacy in the fields of clinical pharmacology, public health, traditional medicine, research ethics, and national health policy. A pathbreaker and a visionary, his list of accomplishments are long. He was a professor of pharmacology, dean, and retired as acting director of the Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research, Chandigarh. He established the Delhi Society for Promotion of Rational Use of Drugs and was the founder director of the Delhi Medical Council. He was the first Indian doctor to receive a Rhodes Scholarship after his stint at Oxford University. He came back to complete his DPhil in pharmacology. He was also felicitated with an honorary degree of Doctor of Science from Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. He has been the advisor to the Department of Health and Family Welfare, Government of National Capital Territory of Delhi, and was nominated by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India, as chairman of the newly constituted expert committee for reforms in drug regulation and clinical trials. Professor Roychowdhury was also served as advisor to the Union Minister of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. At the time of his passing away, he was chairing no fewer than 10 committees at the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. In recognition for his landmark contributions, he was awarded the Padma Shri in 1998. He was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award 2013 by FICCI and the first Lifetime Achievement Award in Integrated Medicine by the College of Medicine London and the Saukya Foundation. His commitment to the country and public health was absolute. Without his landmark work, we would not have the clinical trials framework in the country and the awareness about the problem of antimicrobial resistance. The best way we can honor Professor Roychowdhury is to take his work forward while remembering his graciousness and depth of commitment that brought to the millions of lives. With these few words, I would now hand over to Dr. Professor Urmila Thatte, our co-chair today, to please introduce our orator of today, Dr. Shoibal Mukherjee. Over to Dr. Urmila, please.
Thank you, Santanu. Dr. Shoibal Mukherjee doesn't really need an introduction, but I think it is important for us to remember some of his special achievements. He has a postgraduate qualifications in medicine and pharmacology with over 30 years of experience in drug development and pharmaceutical medicine. He has headed medical and research departments in Pfizer India, Ranjit Laboratories, GVK Biosciences, and Quintiles Asia. He is, and I remember those days when we used to interact during the time he was establishing the Indian Society for Clinical Research. He was the first president of this currently very well-known society. He is currently involved in assignments across the pharmaceutical research and medical startup domains as an independent consultant with assignments in pain, tropical diseases, biologics, vaccines, and phytopharmaceutical research. He has been guest faculty for training and doctoral programs at leading medical institutions and is a member in India and is a member of the research advisory boards and technical committees of various private and public sector organizations and institutions. Dr. Shoibal.
Welcome, Dr. Shoibal. And I request Dr. Shambho to felicitate Dr. Shoibal first, and then he can have the oration. I'll request Dr. Dhaneria to please come up and do the honor. Dr. Shoibal. Just a second, please.
Once more. Thank you.
That's good. So now Dr. Shoibal can have his presentation.
Is the presentation here? Is mine?
Dr. Shambho, presentation, please.
Team Clarinet, please mute others except us. Clarinet, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So please mute others.
Sir, others are muted, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the chairpersons, Professor Urmila Thatte, Professor Tripathi, for the kind introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be here this morning. I hope everyone can hear me. Is the voice clear? Thank you. Great honor for me to be here presenting the Professor Ranjit Roychowdhury Oration. Professor Tripathi has already spoken about Professor Roychowdhury. I would just like to take your attention to a few specific points about him. Can I have the next slide? Can I change the slides from here? Yes, sir. So I'm wondering which have I got? Great. Thank you, Shambhu. So obviously, we've heard about Professor Roychowdhury's life. I would like to pull your attention to certain specific points in his progress, in his pathway, his journey. He started off from Patna. So, here is this gentleman starting off from not that great, metropolitan center in India, and he from Patna moves to Oxford. He gets the Rhodes Scholarship and he moves to Oxford. Obviously, that is a very important period in his life, which I'm sure changed him. We can only speculate, but I'm sure, that changed him a lot. He came back. So many people who go to Oxford never come back. Here was Professor Ranjit Roychowdhury, who chose to come back, and at that time, this was in the late 1950s, that he joined the All India Institute. The institute had just been set up, and he joined it as an assistant professor and started teaching at All India Institute. 2 years at All India Institute, he's in the center of the country in New Delhi, and then he leaves. In 2 years, he leaves All India Institute and joins Ciba Geigy. Now, Ciba Geigy Research Center at that time was a major research center in India, the likes of which we are still to see in India come back. After Ciba Geigy closed down, the Hearst Research Center closed down, AstraZeneca's research center, many of these international research centers closed down in India. We haven't had one come back to India till Novartis has set up this remote service organization in Hyderabad, but Ciba Geigy used to be one of the best. He worked in Ciba Geigy for some 4 years, I think, before he moved to PGIMR Chandigarh. And so he joined PGI in the year 1964 as the head of the department of PGI. And at that time, his age was 34 years. How many of us are already 34 here? I certainly am, almost, a good number. He was head of department of an institute like PGIMR Chandigarh at the age of 34. And, of course, we credit him for starting the DM clinical pharmacology course and bringing clinical pharmacology, giving clinical pharmacology the formal position that it has in teaching and as a discipline. But we must remember that he joined in 1964 and the DM course was started only in 1978. So he had already spent 14 years, part of it being the head of department and then dean and then director. It's only when he became the director of PGI, just 2 years before he left PGI, that he was able to start the DM clinical pharmacology course. So I am quite sure that this would have been an uphill task for him. But I also understand that his time in Ciba Geigy would have given him the perspective that he required to find it so important to start a course which will be focused, at least to some extent, on drug development, of course, also in patient care. So we need to understand how this great person foresaw the needs of the country at that point of time. And then, of course, he moved on from PGI in 1980, moved to WHO, spent the rest of his pre-retirement life with the WHO in various places in Geneva, in Egypt, in Thailand, and so on and so forth. In Rangoon as well, in Yangon. And then with retirement at the age of 60, he moved back to Delhi, and then he was involved, as we all know, because that period was a period when many of us already were associated with him in some way or the other and knew him closely as well. So we know all those things that he contributed to when he was in Delhi. Accolades, there are so many of them. The list is so long that it is very difficult to recount all of them. But the very outstanding ones are the Rhodes Scholarship in 1955, as Professor Tripathi just mentioned earlier. He was the first from India to get that scholarship. The S.S. Bhatnagar Award, this is it's in industrial research, and it was given to him for his, I think, for his work in Ciba-Geigy. Then he moved, he got the B.C. Roy Award, which is the highest award that a medical person, a medically qualified person can get in this country. In 1979, that was when he was director PGI. And then, of course, the crowning glory of it all, Padma Shri in 1998. My association with Professor Roychowdhury was brief and, unlike many more fortunate people, I have not had the opportunity to work intensively with him. However, I did contribute to that Ranjit Roychowdhury committee. He called me on the phone. He asked me to, look at how we could accredit sites. And so I formed this small subcommittee, and there were a few people from PGI, from AIMS, and from other major institutes who were on that small subcommittee. We submitted our report, then it was modified and then included in the RRC committee report, final report. That was in 2012 and going on to 2013. And then because of that association, I was able to, take the liberty of requesting him to be present and be our chief guest at a DIA conference we had in Bangalore that very year, 2013. And I remember the episode, as the person who started the DM course from which I benefited, and also being the person who set up the department of PGI Chandigarh Pharmacology, I thought, and an eminent person like him, it was obvious to me that, the tickets that I do for him should be a business class ticket. So I got business class tickets for him to Bangalore. And then he, at the venue of the conference, he met me, and the first thing he said is, "Why did you buy business class tickets for me?" So, I was expecting a hello or something like that initially, but he just reprimanded me on that. I said, "Why do you buy business class tickets for me?" I said, "Sir, a person like you, I can't have, it would be amiss of me if I did not do that." He said, No, I travel in economy class, and on the way back, please return this ticket and get me an economy class ticket. And that's exactly what he insisted on. So a person so down to earth, and yet his achievements are, something that we can only aspire to. So that much about him. I want you to remember that that clinical pharmacology and the person who thought about clinical pharmacology in this in this country and started the movement in clinical pharmacology did have patient care as well as, I think, the needs of drug development in his mind when he went about putting this course in place. So let's look at clinical pharmacology in India over the years. My topic today is, and let me just recount the topic, perspectives and prospects of clinical pharmacology in India. We've talked a lot about this. I hope I'll be able to summarize this and bring it together. The time for my presentation initially I saw on that was 15 minutes. Obviously, I can't do justice to this topic in 15 minutes, but hopefully I'll be able to finish in half an hour. As we said, clinical pharmacology was named a distinct specialty in this country in 1978. It's not as if other people did not contribute to clinical pharmacology here before that. Many people did, many people here in this city in Calcutta. But in 1978, because of that clinical pharmacology DM course, it became a distinct and recognized specialty. Most candidates thereafter remained in academia in the 1980s, but from the 1990s, the candidate count reached double digits, only in 1990. So over 10 years, there were only 10 DM clinical pharmacologists coming out from PGI Chandigarh, which was the only place where that degree was given out. And by 1990, there were, I was the 11th person, and thereafter, of course, we have two others who were contemporary with me at that time, Professor Biswas and Professor Tripathi. Then the movement to industry and the things, the important tools and skills that are taught to clinical pharmacologists that are so important for drug development began to be recognized. And this was at the time when India opened up to international clinical trials. So in 1995, we had two major events. One was the ICH guidelines being accepted by the major regulators across the world. So clinical trials done anywhere in the world would be accepted in the major markets. Together with that, of course, the pharmaceutical industry worldwide thought that India might be a good place to do clinical trials, and many of them, particularly, it so turned out that I was at that time working in Pfizer, and Pfizer was one of the first industry groups to start clinical research on a global scale here in India. So the movement to industry began and it really gathered pace in the early 2000s. The course demand, therefore, and the demand from industry increased during the first couple of decades of this century, and therefore, more courses were set up, DM clinical pharmacology courses across the country in KEM, in All India Institute, and other new AIMS institutes that came up across the country. The diversity of opportunities as well as the complexity of the science has increased manifold in recent decades. So globalization and harmonization of regulations, growth and diversification of research within industry in India. So now it's not just, clinical trials, but there are many other things that clinical pharmacologists can contribute to within industry. Advancements in genetics and human biology have made the subject itself pretty complex, and rapid rise of information technology and data science, I think, opens up new opportunities for the future, which of course the youngsters in the audience should take note of, because that is really going to be the future, and clinical pharmacologists have to gear up to that. Now, I see clinical pharmacology today in India and perhaps elsewhere in the world as well as 2 or 3 distinct sections. One is clinical pharmacology for patient care. The other, of course, is for asset development, drug development you can call it, but I call it asset development because medical devices are also included, other types of, so a product is often called an asset that you have to develop before you can give you returns. And of course, drug regulation is a third area where contributions can be made by clinical pharmacologists. So we are talking of patient care, asset development, and drug regulation. I will not talk too much about drug regulation, but most of my slides are on patient care and asset development. And under patient care, there is this area of clinical pharmacology consultations, where I think clinical pharmacologists here in this city have really started a movement which many people have mentioned should hopefully be replicated in other parts of the country. Evidence-based medicine, that's another key area where I think clinical pharmacologists must contribute. Health informatics, as I said, and I will talk a little bit about this as we go on. and research leadership. So here you see that it starts with certain things that are very specific to clinical pharmacologists that only clinical pharmacologists can probably do, such as a clinical pharmacology consultation. You need to be trained in this subject. But as you go down this list, some of these things are not, the core domain for a clinical pharmacologist, but the area is open to clinical pharmacologists, and I think clinical pharmacologists possess the skills to excel in those areas and take those areas, take leadership positions in those areas. When we come to asset development, and here we are talking to an extent of industry, but of course both these, patient care and asset development, it is not as if some of the things that we might need to do under the patient care head are not done by people in industry. They need to have those skills as well. And on the other hand, the things I've listed below asset development are also done within hospitals, particularly the operational parts of that. So while there's some kind of a division between the left side of this slide being more about hospitals and academia, and the right side of this slide being more about industry, but there is a good bit of overlap. So asset development is development strategy. Clinical pharmacology, now this might be confusing because clinical pharmacology is the name of the entire domain, but also there's something called clinical pharmacology, very specific to industry, which is about early drug development, phase 1 volunteer studies, and we'll talk about that also. And finally, development operations. So patient care, let's look at that first, and the clinical pharmacology consultation. The use case, when does clinical pharmacology consultation become so important? It becomes important in the clinical pharmacology clinic, where you might want to take that consultation, or individual patients can take that consultation. And that would be for therapeutically complex cases where there is polypharmacy, there are multiple underlying disease entities that the patient is suffering from. Unusual responses to therapy, treatment emergent effects, including side effects of various kinds. That's probably the general use case for a clinical pharmacology clinic. Therapeutic drug monitoring is another area where clinical pharmacology consultation is important, and people in the audience here, Smita particularly, is very well versed in that area. And this is something that, key centers in clinical pharmacology have been doing exceedingly well. However, this is not something that is happening generally across the country in all clinical pharmacology units. And this probably should, in the future, progress should be there in this direction more and more. There are some various specific therapies that benefit from TDM, and this skill has to be a general skill that all clinical pharmacologists should begin to have. Individualization of therapy, as we get into into genomics and into understanding the complexities at the molecular level of the newer treatments that are coming into use. Individualization of therapy will become more and more important, and we've been talking of that for more than a decade now. However, we don't see it happening in most disease areas, except perhaps in oncology at this time. However, it is going to move from oncology to other clinical domains over the next few decades, and I think that is one area, again, because of its complexity, that clinical pharmacologists can contribute to. Now, all of these things require a knowledge base. So we come back to, if these are the services that we as clinical pharmacologists would want to provide, then what is the knowledge base that those clinical pharmacologists need to have? So knowledge of drug interactions, PK/PD interactions, food-drug interactions, traditional medicine interactions between traditional medicine and the modern medicine tools that we use. all of those clinical pharmacologists should be well versed with. And the last of these, interactions with traditional medicine, is something that only we can do here in India, because that's where traditional medicine is used. So this is a great area for research for us clinical pharmacologists, and I think people should take that opportunity and work in this area to see what kind of interactions do happen, and what precautions, what consultation one should give to patients who are taking both at the same time. Dose effect and PK/PD correlations, mechanism of action and off-target effects, pharmacogenomics, these are some of the things, the knowledge base that one needs to have to be able to provide consultation in clinical pharmacology. So what's the scope? I think the scope of this is very large. Clinical pharmacology consultation, I've used that word. What it means is, one, to offer consultatory services to other specialties across your hospital. But it also means that we can put together training modules. For example, we hear Shambho and other colleagues here in Calcutta talk about case studies. A patient came, this is what happened to the patients. Cannot we compile a tome, and over the years, I think more and more such cases would accumulate, and we should have, somebody should write a book about this. And my request is to Professor Tripathi to start this around with the people who are doing practice as well as clinical pharmacology practice, I would call it here. Books and publications, we need to take this to the next level. Yesterday we were talking in that discussion that we had about the need to build awareness and also to bring visibility to clinical pharmacology. How better to do that than to have useful books that would be of use to other specialties across your hospital. Books and publications, analysis of big data. So now many of us are working in private hospitals, and some of us are working in government hospitals which do have some degree of electronic data available. Now, most big private hospitals are moving towards capture of patient data electronically as electronic health records. And over a period of time, and I'm currently working closely with the Medanta hospitals, and I'm trying to get them to understand that we need to remain with patients for a longer period than the short period that they are associated with the hospital. A patient comes to a hospital, gets registered, and his record gets into the hospital HIS, the hospital information system, and thereafter that patient might be an outpatient or an inpatient. Even if that patient is an inpatient, he's with the hospital for, probably he or she is there with the hospital for a period of maybe 7 days, 10 days, 12 days, 15 days. Then that patient leaves. And then you lose that patient for a period of time. If the patient comes back, maybe the same registration number is used. However, we do not have, that patient might go away somewhere else. That patient might have come from a great distance, and some local person is following that, local physician is following that patient up. Unless we can keep track of what's happening to this patient over some electronic system, we are losing that patient. We are losing the data of outcomes of that patient. What happened to this patient over a longer period of time? So that is one, but of course, even the short period connection that patients have with hospitals and the data gets into the hospital information system can be analyzed. This is big data analysis for which you need to have some familiarity with data science. And of course, clinical pharmacologists will never be doing this full-time themselves. It will be data scientists who will be doing the work, but it will have to be clinical pharmacologists perhaps who have to direct these data scientists to do the analysis and come out with associations which would then give you ideas for further research, case control studies, signal detection, and so on and so forth. Now, that brings me to the next slide. evidence-based medicine. Now, evidence-based medicine has emerged as a distinct cycle of research activities that has begun to drive the evolution of medical practice. We all understand that by now. What does that mean? We usually think of evidence-based medicine as meta-analysis and, getting some conclusions out of one meta-analysis project. Obviously, that is the centerpiece of evidence-based medicine, and clinical pharmacologists need to be well versed in the techniques of meta-analysis, which is a little more complex than just analyzing a single study. In fact, it's quite complicated if you want to do it well. But meta-analysis is only the central piece of this. I think it starts with the identification of gaps in evidence. When you look at a particular aspect of therapeutics and you want to determine whether something does or does not help in this particular outcome, and you look at the data, there will be many times that you will come across gaps in evidence. That there is no evidence, there is no good evidence, and yet we use it or we don't use something. Once you identify those gaps, you need to go on to designing and conduct of studies to generate the evidence that is required. Now, that's not always easy, but many times it is indeed easy. It's only that nobody has thought about it. And then it comes to the evaluation of all the evidence that is available across the world through meta-analysis, and then the compilation of that evidence and recommendations coming out from the compilation of all the evidence that goes into treatment guidelines and so forth. But once that those treatment guidelines are there, you need to see whether these treatment guidelines are leading to change in outcomes, improvements in outcomes or not. And if they are not, then you go back again in that cycle to looking at what gaps you still have in the evidence and how your guidelines can be improved. And of course, those are informed by new therapies that are coming in. The required skills in this area is the assessment of study designs, evaluation of quality of evidence, the various grades of quality of evidence, meta-analytical techniques, biostatistical techniques, research methodology, and technical writing skills, all of those. And these are, once again, therefore, skills that clinical pharmacologists must have. Now, health information analytics, I just spoke about this, about the hospital information system, electronic medical records, as well as registries. A lot of clinical groups work with registries, so they are more restricted than the whole gamut of hospital information that might be available. Registries are only for a specific disease. But then from those registries, you go on to analytics. Now, I'm not sure that the analytics is happening so well. A cardiologist might have a heart failure registry. And the cardiologist is only looking at what is of interest to cardiologists. Now, I'm not saying that the interests of cardiologists are any different from or should be any different from those of clinical pharmacologists, but the clinical pharmacologist has a slightly different angle to look at that same data. And I think it would be a good partnership for the cardiologist to have with the clinical pharmacologist in the analysis of these registries. Once these analytics are done, you have the insights, and that gives you research ideas. And from those insights, you can develop predictive models, screening tools. These are not being done at the present time. These registries are not being properly used, I think. I've had some experience with that at Medanta, but I see that there's a lot more that can be done. Signal detection, as far as pharmacovigilance is concerned, is very much within that. So signal detection today is done by big companies for the medicines that they sell based on the adverse event reports that come to them. However, signal detection, I think, can be done in a much better way when you have access to a hospital information system and you have the outcomes of patients in front of you and the medicines that they took. And of course, pharmacoeconomic analysis, because hospital data also has economic data. And pharmacoeconomics is certainly within the central domain of clinical pharmacologists. Skills that you require, once again, we are going into areas which are traditionally not part of clinical pharmacology, but I think they must begin to be now. Some basics of these things must be taught in clinical pharmacology in future. Big data analytics, statistical methodology, of course, we always did learn a bit of that. Pharmacoepidemiology, pharmacoeconomics, research methodology again, pharmacology and specialty medicine. These are some of the areas and skills that you require to do justice to health information analytics and the clinical pharmacologist's role in it. The explosive growth of data science and artificial intelligence will deeply influence medical science and practice, particularly impacting clinical pharmacology and therapeutics. Go on to the next slide on patient care. We are still on patient care. But here we are coming to research support and leadership. So as the predominant source of clinical material in the form of patients, biological samples, medical imagery and data, it is the moral duty, I think, of healthcare institutions to contribute to the advancement of medical research. So institutions, healthcare institutions that are not contributing to research, I think are not in the morally correct position. They are the custodians of a huge amount of data, and it is imperative for them to contribute to medical research and to progress research and healthcare. They are not doing the full spectrum of service to humankind just by treating patients. They must participate in research. And that participation, I'm not saying that that does not happen, almost particularly in teaching hospitals, almost every physician participates in some kind of research. But that research needs to be organized, that research needs to be ethical, of course, and it needs to be efficient. So what I'm saying is that the individual research that individual physicians do in hospitals is not sufficient. That it needs to be a hospital-wide program, that the hospital-wide program must be directed towards certain specific goals. And of course, ethics is, I think, reasonably well managed through ethics committees, etc., but it needs to be efficient as well. I think the research that individual researchers do in hospitals falls short of the extent of efficiency that can be achieved. And I think the clinical pharmacologist is best placed to lead this effort within hospitals. One way to do that, or to begin to do that and be recognized as somebody who can lead this effort, is to provide institutional research assistance and to form a unit. And perhaps the clinical pharmacology department or sub-department can probably be the center for this, an institutional research assistance unit. And that research assistance unit would have a lot of things to do. It would provide research methodology training, it would provide grant proposal writing assistance, it could provide regulatory assistance. Yesterday we were talking about it, and I think Professor Sandhya talked about it, that most researchers don't have any idea of what regulations impact their research. So regulatory assistance. Research ethics administration, including ethics committees or scientific review committees, research policies and strategy. So when I'm saying that individual researchers doing their own bit of research is not sufficient, we must bring it under a larger umbrella, then what I'm saying is that there must be research policies and there must be research strategy within each institution. And then the research that is being done across the institution must be monitored and tracked. At present, academic research is not monitored at all. So individual researchers are doing it, and everybody assumes that it's being done well. But we can never be sure of that. So for anything to be published today in international journals, you require to certify that these have been done according to good clinical practice. And good clinical practice requires monitoring. And we do not have monitors. So it could be that the clinical pharmacology unit provides monitors, what are called CRCs in industrial parlance, the clinical research coordinators. In industrial setting, there are CRAs who do that job when it's a CRO overseeing this research. And then the data management and analysis, once again, at present, individual researchers do it in a manner which is now becoming more and more archaic. It needs to be done in a much more organized manner on electronic systems. So data management and analysis, and finally publication support. So these are some of the services I think we can provide to bring visibility to the clinical pharmacology department in a form which gives it, preeminence in the research area and provides a service as well as gives an opportunity for the clinical pharmacologist to serve as a leader in this area. Now, those are some of the things that clinical pharmacologists can do within hospitals. So while we have been discussing all about how relevance of clinical pharmacology, I think those things can bring that relevance in. Now, let's look at asset development and what happens within industry, but of course can also happen within institutions, medical institutions. I want to first talk about the clinical pharmacology unit. Now, the clinical pharmacology, many people here know about this. There are two pictures here. You see on the top a clinical pharmacology unit. This is a picture taken from KEM, clinical pharmacology unit. And many people will recognize this one. And the one below is the bioanalytical section at CMC Vellore. So those are pictures taken from Indian clinical pharmacology units across the country. So some units are doing great work. The clinical pharmacology unit is a unit where volunteer studies happen. Of course, patient studies can also happen there. It's not as if, but it's specifically geared towards volunteer studies. And study design, study management, interpretation, and reporting are some of the things that are the specific responsibilities of that unit. And there are general responsibilities: study oversight, study organization, quality oversight, volunteer management, staff management. We are talking of phase 1 trials and BAB studies, basically. So let's be clear about that. Very important part of drug development. Once it goes through preclinical evaluation, and you know that we have the data that if it is given to humans, humans will not drop down dead, and they will not have severe adverse events which will threaten their lives. So once you know that it is safe to give to human beings, you come to phase 1, and that is a key and critical area. 30% of drugs get dropped off from the pipeline at phase 1 because of problems with pharmacokinetics and sometimes other kinds of problems, but mainly with pharmacokinetics. It's in phase 2 that they get dropped off, and phase 2 is even worse. 50% of the pipeline gets dropped off as phase 2, and that's mostly because of lack of efficacy. The specific training, and this is one area in industry where you cannot do without clinical pharmacologists. You require clinical pharmacologists and clinical pharmacologists alone. Right now, indeed, there are clinical pharmacology units being run with people who are not DM clinical pharmacologists and who do not have that much of formal training in clinical pharmacology. They have picked it up and they've been trained by their institutions and their companies. But I think this is a specific domain of clinical pharmacology, and if we can't kind of dominate this area, then what clinical pharmacology are we talking about? pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, one needs to know clinical science, one needs to have medical knowledge. Pharmaceutical science is important. You need to understand about the medicine and some pharmaceutics of the medicine, drug dissolution, drug dispersion, ADME of course. You need to understand in detail drug regulation, research methodology, and research ethics. So all of this comes into the domain of running a clinical pharmacology unit. General skills that are required. Now, somebody who's heading a clinical pharmacology unit, and I am imagining that it's a clinical pharmacologist, he or she needs to have an understanding of instrumentation, because a major part of a clinical pharmacology unit in phase 1 studies is the bioanalysis. It's all about pharmacokinetics. So that person needs to have some good idea of instrumentation. Now, that does not come easily in the pharmacology departments. Even when there is an HPLC or an LCMS, the medically qualified people, it's the the technicians or the PhD students or the MSc students that are actually handling that apparatus. It's not the medical graduate who's doing that, and I think that needs to change. They need to have hands-on experience with these instruments. Laboratory science, good laboratory practice, basic economics, because when you're running a clinical pharmacology unit, you need to be cognizant of what salaries are being paid, what is if you are in an industrial setting, of course, somebody is paying for that study, so are you getting remunerated, what should be the pricing, etc. People management, because people would be reporting into you, and crisis management, because crises do happen in clinical pharmacology units. I'm going a little fast. Asset development, again, we are on that topic, and clinical research operation. Here I would like to say, we see a lot of clinical research operation in this country right now. Clinical trials are being done. A lot of them are being done. Obviously, this is a big country and we can do many, many times more clinical research than we've been doing in the past. But what is being done currently is mostly clinical research operations. So often protocols for new therapeutic entities are being written abroad by the sponsor, and they are being implemented in our hospitals. The clinical pharmacologist does not really have a central or essential role in clinical research operations, except for some of the things that I'll talk of in a moment. Yet, clinical pharmacologists with the right skills can add value to leadership roles in clinical research operations. If you go to a CRO today in India, you will find very few medical people. Forget about clinical pharmacologists, very few medical people. And those medical people are slotted into a medical department. And that medical department has a very circumscribed role, not a very big role. They are not in leadership positions. That's because the general skills that they need to have do not exist. They have grown up as pharmacologists doing research on laboratory animals, and then, of course, they are medically qualified people, so they understand medicine as well. Many of them are not even pharmacologists, they are from other medical disciplines. And they do the role of medical monitoring, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I think there's no reason why they should be confined to the medical department of a CRO. They should be the leaders within the CRO. They should be, the chief operating officer and heads of various divisions within an organization, a commercial organization. So, clinical pharmacologists should see clinical research operations as an area of opportunity to gain valuable experience in asset development. Now, I have seen that when you offer a job in clinical research operations, such as a CRA's job, these days in India, medical people don't consider that as something that they would like to take up. Obviously, at the starting level, salaries are not all that good, and probably there are better opportunities for medical graduates there. However, a CRA's job is the best place to start understanding the area of research. And 2 years or even 1 year as a CRA will equip the medical person with knowledge and skills that they need to have, an understanding of the process like no other role. And then you can grow on and go on to specific medical roles and specific leadership roles. But this could be a good starting area. The role of the clinical pharmacologist in clinical operations is in the area of protocol development. Of course, often somebody else, clinician, will also have to be involved. Protocol training, this is often done, and it's not only the clinical pharmacologist, it could be any medically qualified person can do all of these things. And that is why I said that it is not the specific domain of a clinical pharmacologist. So protocol training, medical monitoring. And medical monitoring is a very, very important job which I think is underplayed in the industry. Medical monitoring is all about looking at the medical data that is coming in a clinical trial and looking and seeing that data, and without the aid of analytics, without statistics, without actually analyzing that data, just by looking at that data to make out that there is something wrong with this patient here. There maybe, he got a wrong dose, or maybe the inclusion criteria were not completely followed. You can just look at that data and you can, a qualified and experienced person will be able to make out what's wrong with that data and what's going wrong with this trial. Medical monitoring is all about that. Event narratives, so adverse events and the writing of what happened to that patient can only be done by a medically qualified person. The data interpretation, reporting, publication, and the skills that you need to have are all listed here. Good clinical practice, research ethics, medical data evaluation, narration, summarization, all these things, and these need to come into clinical pharmacologist's curriculum. And lastly, strategy. Request to those online at this time, please keep yourself muted. So this is my, I think, second last slide. Strategy. So now we are talking of having come away from clinical pharmacology in industry and clinical research operations. We are now talking of clinical research strategy in an industrial setting. And here again, I think the clinical pharmacologist is well suited to lead in this area. The responsibilities are as follows. Somebody who's responsible for strategy must be able to evaluate preclinical data. Now, this is a very interesting area because what happens is that 80% to 85% of the new product pipeline that is there within the industry is coming out from small organizations. These are not the big Pfizers or the GSKs or the Novartises of the world. 85% of new molecules are discovered either in a university setting or in a small industrial setting. And now, those people do not really, often these are chemists who have discovered the molecule, or they are researchers who know very little about the disease process itself or anything else about it. They know about the molecule that they have discovered. So the clinical pharmacologist brings medical knowledge, understanding of how to develop the product, the regulations and all of that. And believe me, I consult for a number of organizations. I find that there are people like, bench scientists there. There are people who are investment bankers because they bring in the money for that development. So they have the money to do the development and they have the science to develop the molecule. Thereafter, they don't know anything about development. And so the insights I can give them and the route that I can show them for development is very valuable to them. But for that, you require certain knowledge and skills. What are those knowledges? So pharmacology, toxicology, obviously, but regulatory science and global regulatory science, it's not sufficient to know what the CDSCO will ask you, because you have to sit in meetings with the US FDA. And the US FDA you have to ask the questions, US FDA will give you answers, but you have to be able to understand those answers and why they are giving you that. And sometimes, if the questions that you ask are silly, then they will give you silly answers. So regulatory science. And I think not enough emphasis is there on that in our curriculum these days. Therapeutic area knowledge, pharmacometrics. Pharmacometrics is an interesting area. Pharmacometrics is a global kind of thing in which you look at PK, PD and things like that, but also ultimately evaluate whether this drug is worth approving or not. So the word has come out from the US FDA, so they have looked at it from their point of view, but companies and people running strategy in pharmaceutical companies need to be able to evaluate whether this product is worth taking forward or not. So that's called pharmacometrics. You of course need to understand clinical sciences, research methodology, ethics, and practical considerations. This is very important, practical considerations of whether this study can be done or not. So in years to come, as innovation becomes an integral part of the pharmaceutical industry in India, which it still is not, some of the big companies are doing this, professionals skilled in development strategy will be much in demand. Clinical pharmacologists are best placed to meet this demand. So that's my last slide. I think the prospects for clinical pharmacology in India are bright, provided we orient ourselves to the opportunities and equip ourselves with the skills that the future will demand of us. So my presentation was basically to give you an idea of what we might need in the future and hope that people, middle-level people who are coming into positions of responsibility today are able to see this and able to orient our teaching to these opportunities, and that the youngsters are able to see these opportunities and prepare themselves for it. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to and such an honor really to give this oration named after a great person like Professor Ranjit Roychowdhury. Thank you all very much. Any questions that I can answer at that time?
So, this being an oration, we are not allowing any question. But then I think it was unquestionable, the presentation. Okay. And so eloquently you have articulated that it is really particularly for the youngsters, for the newcomers. Yesterday we had experience that many of the young people who have joined clinical pharmacology, there was so much of confusion and there was so much of the so-called identity crisis. But then listening to your lecture today, I think you have clarified that where are the problems lying right now at this moment and how we should take it forward. What are the challenges ahead of us, and the way you have actually explained that these are not something which is unachievable to most of us. So there is no place for any kind of despair or frustration, and the prospect and the future is quite bright, which our orator today, Dr. Shoibal Mukherjee, has so nicely explained. And the more I hear Dr. Mukherjee, okay, it's a pleasure really to hear Dr. Mukherjee. It's a great way you have actually summarized. I understand that the organizers had given you 15 minutes, but when somebody is talking sense, there is no point in interrupting, in fact. It was great listening to you. Thank you very much. I has always been a great admirer of Dr. Mukherjee. So my respect and reverence to you increases every time I listen to you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mukherjee.
Thank you.
Madam is there, Dr. Thatte, I think she has left. She already sent a message that she has some other commitment. So that's why I took this opportunity. So I thank you again, sir.